The most famous luxury watch in the world was invented by a man who did not own a watch factory, did not know how to build a watch, and was not Swiss. He was a German salesman in London, importing watch parts in shoeboxes, and in less than 30 years, he would build the most recognizable status symbol on Earth, a name that today moves more money than the entire Swiss banking sector did when he started. This is the story of how a 5-letter word became a synonym for a rival. How a watch worn by JFK, Paul Newman, and the deepest dive in human history became the only luxury object that holds its value better than gold. And why almost everything you think you know about Rolex is wrong. Before we get to Wilsdorf, before the Mariana Trench, before the moon, here is what icon actually means in luxury. It is not price. It is not heritage. It is not even quality. Plenty of expensive, well-made, century-old objects exist that nobody recognizes. An icon is something else. 4 conditions. 1. The object becomes shorthand for the entire category. You cannot picture the thing without picturing this version of it. 2. It crosses class lines. The same object is worn by the trader, the rapper, the surgeon, and the mechanic. 3. It holds value across decades, often appreciating instead of depreciating. 4. The story attached to it is bigger than the object itself. The object becomes a vessel for myth. By the end of this video, you will have measured Rolex against all 4, and you will understand why almost every other watch on Earth fails at least one of them. Let's start where the legend starts, with a lie. Start with the name itself. Rolex. It means nothing. There is no Mr. Rolex. There is no Swiss village called Rolex. The word does not exist in German, French, English, or any language Hans Wilsdorf spoke. He invented it. And the reason he invented it is the first clue to why the brand became what it became. Wilsdorf wanted a name that was, and these are his words, short enough to fit on a watch dial, easy to pronounce in every language, and impossible to mispronounce. He claimed a genie whispered it to him on a London omnibus. That is almost certainly a marketing story he told later. What is true is that he tested hundreds of combinations, and Rolex won because it sounded like the ticking of a watch. Here is what most people don't know. For the first 3 years of its life, Rolex was not a watch company. It was a watch importing company called Wilsdorf and Davis. They bought movements from a small workshop in the Swiss village of Bienne and put them in cases made in England. They were, in the language of the trade, a private label brand, the Costco of watches, in 1908. So how did a private label importer become the most powerful name in luxury? One word: precision. In 1910, Wilsdorf did something nobody in the watch industry took seriously. He sent one of his wristwatches. And remember, in 1910, wristwatches were considered women's jewelry. Men carried pocket watches. He sent this little wristwatch to the official Swiss watch testing observatory in Bienne, and he asked them to certify it. The testers laughed. They had never tested a wristwatch. They tested marine chronometers, the kind of clock ships used to navigate the Atlantic. Wilsdorf insisted. They tested it, and it passed. It was the first wristwatch in history to receive a certified marine chronometer rating. The men who designed clocks for naval warships had just confirmed that a piece of jewelry on a leather strap kept time better than the watch in their own pocket. 4 years later, in 1914, Rolex did it again. This time at Kew Observatory in England, the gold standard of timekeeping certification. Class A precision, the first wristwatch ever to earn it. And when the First World War broke out a few months later and British soldiers in the trenches realized they could not fish a pocket watch out of a uniform while being shot at, the wristwatch stopped being jewelry. It became equipment. Rolex did not invent the wristwatch, but Rolex was the first company to bet its entire existence on the idea that the wristwatch would replace the pocket watch. And in 1914, that was a wild bet. Every legend needs a turning point. Rolex has 2, and they happen back to back. And together they are the entire reason the brand exists today. The first is called the Oyster. The second is called the Perpetual. Most people who own a Rolex have those 2 words on their dial and have no idea what they mean. 1926. The problem with every wristwatch on Earth is the same problem: water, sweat, dust. The case is just metal pieces fitted together. Open it up, you can see daylight through the seams. Wash your hands, and your watch dies. So Wilsdorf takes out a patent on something nobody had built before. A case so tightly sealed it could not be opened without a special tool. Hermetically locked. He named it after the only animal that can stay underwater indefinitely without drowning. The oyster. And then he does the thing that turns the oyster from a product into a myth. In 1927, a young English typist named Mercedes Gleitzer decides to swim the English Channel. She is the first British woman to attempt it. Wilsdorf reads about it in the newspaper. He gets on a train, finds her, and asks her to wear his watch on the swim. Strapped to her neck on a chain, because in 1927 a wristwatch on a swimmer was still a strange idea. She swims for 10 hours and 15 minutes in 50-degree water. She does not finish the swim. The cold beats her short of the English coast and she has to be pulled out. But the watch is still ticking, still keeping perfect time. Wilsdorf takes out a full-page ad on the front page of the Daily Mail. Not page 2. The front page. The world's first wraparound newspaper ad. And the Oyster, a watch that had been struggling to sell, becomes the watch every adventurer in the British Empire wants on their wrist. 3 years later, the second turning point. Up to 1931, every wristwatch on Earth had to be wound by hand. You forgot to wind it, it stopped. So Rolex patents the first commercially successful self-winding mechanism, a small weighted rotor inside the case that swings every time you move your wrist. The watch winds itself, forever. They call it the perpetual. Now stop and think about what this means. Before 1931, owning a watch meant a daily ritual. Win the watch every morning. Forget, and time stops. After 1931, Rolex is selling something completely different. They are selling a relationship with time itself. As long as you are alive, as long as your wrist moves, the watch keeps going. Stop moving, and the watch stops with you. It is the most poetic feature in the history of luxury goods. Oyster plus perpetual, waterproof plus self-winding, 2 patents stacked on top of each other. By 1933, Rolex is no longer competing with other watch companies. It is in a category of one, and it spends the next 90 years making sure no one else gets in. Here is where most documentaries about Rolex get the story wrong. They tell you Rolex became iconic because of celebrities, because Paul Newman wore one in his Daytona, because James Bond wore one in the early films. That is the gift shop version of history. The real reason Rolex became iconic is that Wilsdorf made a calculated bet decades earlier, long before the celebrities, that the way to sell precision was to attach his watch to the most extreme acts of human exploration on Earth. Not advertising. Conquest. 1953. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay become the first humans to summit Mount Everest. On their wrists, both men are wearing Rolex Oysters. This is the photograph that puts Rolex on the wall of every gentleman's club from London to Hong Kong. The Explorer model is created and named in their honour. But the Everest story has a quiet asterisk. We do not actually know which watch Hillary checked at the summit. He had a Rolex on, yes. He also had a Smith's, an English watch, on his other wrist. And in his memoirs, the watch he praises by name is the Smith's. Rolex never mentions this. They didn't need to. The photograph was enough. 1960. Don Walsh and Jacques Picard pilot the bathyscaphe Trieste to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 35,800 feet beneath the Pacific Ocean, the deepest point on the planet. Strapped to the outside of the submersible, not inside, where it would be protected, but outside, exposed to pressures that would crush a tank, is an experimental Rolex. They called it the Deep Sea Special. When the Trieste surfaced, the Rolex was still ticking, still keeping time. The pressure at that depth is 16,000 pounds per square inch. To put that in human terms, that is the weight of 50 jumbo jets pressing on a single watch crystal. And the second hand kept sweeping. And then there is the moon, which is the most famous story about Rolex that is not actually about Rolex. When NASA tested watches for the Apollo missions, Rolex submitted a Daytona. It failed the qualification tests. The watch that went to the moon on Buzz Aldrin's wrist was an Omega Speedmaster. To this day, you can walk into any Rolex boutique on Earth and not a single salesperson will mention this story. They don't have to. By the time of the moon landing, Rolex had already won the war for the wrist. So that is the romance, the conquests, the patents, the photographs. But here is the part that makes Rolex genuinely strange among luxury brands. It is not run like a luxury brand. It is run like a bank that happens to make watches. In 1960, when Hans Wilsdorf died with no heirs and no children, he did something almost no other luxury founder has ever done. He left his entire company, every share, every patent, every factory, to a private charitable foundation in Geneva, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which means Rolex, the most famous luxury brand on Earth, is technically a non-profit. This structure changes everything. Because Rolex has no shareholders demanding quarterly growth, the company can do something its competitors cannot. It can strangle its own supply. Deliberately. For decades. Rolex produces around 1 million watches per year. That number has barely changed in 20 years, while global demand has tripled. Walk into any authorized dealer in any city and ask for a stainless steel Daytona, a Submariner, a GMT Master. They will smile and put your name on a list. The list might be 3 years long. It might be 5. For a Daytona, it has been functionally infinite for over a decade. This scarcity is the engine. Because supply is choked, the secondary market, the grey market, explodes. A stainless steel Daytona has a retail price of around $15,000. The same watch on the resale market sells for twice that, sometimes 3 times. Which means the moment you walk out of a Rolex boutique with the right model, the watch on your wrist is worth more than what you paid for it. There is no other luxury good on Earth that does this consistently. Not Hermes bags, not Ferraris, not first edition books. Rolex stainless sports models have outperformed the S&P 500 over multiple decades. And here is the cleverest part. Because the foundation owns everything, profits do not flow to executives or investors. They flow back into research, into manufacturing, and famously, into making in-house every single component of the watch. Case, bracelet, dial, movement, even the gold. Rolex has its own foundry. It is the only watch company on Earth that smelts its own gold. They built a furnace in Geneva that runs at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit because they did not trust anyone else to do it correctly. When you wear a gold Rolex, the gold itself was born inside the same building as the watch, so pull all of this back. Remember the 4 conditions. Let's see how Rolex scores. Condition 1. Shorthand for the category. You cannot picture a luxury wristwatch without picturing a Rolex. Not Patek. Not Audemars. Not Vacheron. Watches that are arguably more sophisticated. The default mental image is a Submariner or a Daytona. Check. Condition 2. Crosses class lines. A Rolex on a wrist is shorthand whether the wrist belongs to a Wall Street trader, a Silicon Valley founder, a rapper, a surgeon, or a mechanic who saved for 20 years. No other object in the global luxury market crosses that many lines. Check. Condition 3. Holds or gains value over time. Stainless sport models have outperformed the S&P 500 over multiple decades. The watch on your wrist is worth more than what you paid for it the moment you walk out of the boutique. Check. Condition 4. Carries a story larger than itself. Everest. The Mariana Trench. The Bavarian salesman with no factory. The genie on the bus. The patent that lets the watch wind itself as long as you are alive. Check. 4 for 4. Now run the same test on any other watch. Patek Philippe. Condition 1 fails. Most people cannot picture one. Omega. Condition 3 fails. Speedmasters depreciate the moment they leave the store. Audemars Piguet. Condition 2 fails. It does not cross class lines. The Royal Oak lives almost exclusively on the wrists of one demographic. Rolex is the only watch on Earth that hits all 4. That is what icon actually means. Not best, not most expensive, not oldest. All 4 conditions, no exceptions. And this is the strangest part of all. Hans Wilsdorf, the German salesman in London who could not build a watch, who hawked imported movements out of shoeboxes, who made up a name on a bus. He understood something in 1908 that the entire watch industry took 50 years to figure out. He understood that the watch was no longer about telling time. By the 20th century, every man who could afford a watch already knew what time it was. The watch had become something else. A signal, a story, a piece of identity worn on the body. And he sold it harder, longer, and more relentlessly than anyone else. That is what makes Rolex iconic. Not the precision, not the patents, not the movie stars. It is the story. And the story has been ticking, without winding, for over 100 years. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the hidden architecture behind the objects, the brands, and the men who shaped them, there is a whole library of them coming. The jet-set playbook, fashion, cars, watches, travel, fragrance, sound. One detail at a time. Dress like you mean it. Subscribe.